When it comes to songwriting, a lot of people want to know, okay, where do I start? What do I actually do first? I want to write a song, okay, good. But what specifically do I do before I do anything else? And the answer, of course, is that there are many different great ways to start writing a song. But in this video, we're going to talk about one very specific way that I don't think is talked about enough, and that is reverse engineering from a song title. Let's talk about it. Alright, so what do we mean by reverse engineering from a song title? Well, very simple. We come up with a song title that we find compelling, and from there reverse engineer, okay, what would a song called this be about? So we're going to talk about a couple different ways to do this, but one great way is to simply start with a word that intrigues you, something that you think is a really vivid, interesting word, or maybe even something as simple as an animal that you really like or you think would make a compelling symbol for something in a song. Now you may have noticed I said pick a word that is vivid, so here's your first sub-tip, if you will, which is essentially try to pick a word that has some imagery to it. Not something like love, there isn't really an image that comes along with a word like love, but a word like crown or throne or tiger, all of those, immediately there's a bit of an image. This is going to be helpful because it's going to help make your song title more vivid and probably more interesting. Obviously, not all song titles have to do this, but it's a great way to start. So let's pick a few words to start with. Let's take something like tides, king, and then maybe some derivations of king or related words to king like crown or throne, and then something like silhouette. So now that you have your one vivid word, or at least a word that you find interesting, just add one more word to it. Very often this will be something like an adjective for your noun. Let's pick tides and just play around with that. We're going to try adding words to it. Let's try sunlit tides, or maybe starlit tides, wild tides, gentle tides, red tides, black tides, stained tides, rolling tides, maybe even incandescent tides. Now right away, one of those may have stood out to you. In fact, for me, a song I've been working on recently is called Sunlit Tides, basically by this exact methodology. I thought, you know what, tides, this is an EP that's using a lot of ocean imagery. Tides is a pretty word. I want to play with that. And then I thought, ooh, sunlit tides, that's a compelling, interesting image. It's so beautiful to me that I just want to write a song about it. So maybe when you do this, you don't come up with any words that you really like, in which case you can just iterate on it. And a great way to iterate on it is to use something like thesaurus.com. Let's dive into an example of that. So something you could do, let's say in this one we started with the word king, is to simply iterate on what we started with. So let's say that we came up with the word king and we thought, okay, mean king. But then we thought, okay, that's a terrible song title. I don't want to have a song called Mean King. But we can just put mean into thesaurus.com and maybe come up with some more interesting words. And we can dive farther and farther until we get to a word that we really like. So when we type in mean, something that we may see is something like evil. Okay, maybe that's more what you want to go for. You're like, okay, I want the king to be a really evil king, but I still don't like that song title. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Okay, in this list, I really like the word vile. Vile king. Ooh, okay, maybe that's something that starts to seem like that's a song I would want to listen to. What is that song about? Vile king? Or maybe you still don't like that. You can go deeper, can go to something like immoral. Okay, you're trying to say an immoral king. And then from there you get to corrupt, and that might be your winner. You get corrupt king, so you get that sort of 2K sounds. Maybe that's something that you like. Maybe corrupt king really resonates with you. Or maybe you take it in a different direction and you get something like wicked king. And then from there, we can of course iterate even on the king portion. Now let's say you like vile king, but you can still try to iterate some more and see if you can come up with something that you like even better. So we could take the word king and try to find some words that are maybe related to that. Now we could do some obvious replacements like vile emperor or vile pharaoh or vile prince or vile princess or vile queen. But something else we can do is just utilize some related words, which by the way, you could use relatedwords.org for help with this, but you could just spitball things that are similar or evoke the idea of a king. Maybe something like a throne or a crown. So maybe after we've iterated through all this, we ended up with something like vile crown, which we will revisit in a bit when we do the second step of how to reverse engineer a song from a song title. Before we get there, let's talk about another way to get a song title, which is simply to borrow it from another piece of art. You could borrow it from something like a movie. For instance, there's a movie by Pixar called Onward. I thought that was a great word. It evokes this sort of pushing through even though life isn't very good right now. We're struggling, things are not great, but we still go onward. It has this sort of triumphant through the darkness sound, even though it's just one word. So I loved it. So that's a great song title just by itself, Onward. Something else we could do is borrow from a title of a traditional art piece, something like a painting or a sculpture. I literally just Googled this before making the video, and some that came up are Starry Night, which of course everybody knows, The Night Watch, The Persistence of Memory, which I had never heard of, but that sounds like it could be an interesting song title, The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. Those are all great titles to work with. Now, of course, most of the time you probably aren't going to want to take the title wholesale, as in the case with Onward, where I just was like, no, I'm going to take that exact title because that one word is enough. But maybe when it comes to something like The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, that's something that should be split into two. Above the Sea of Fog, that's kind of interesting, or just The Sea of Fog, and then also just The Wanderer. Not only that, but we can iterate on these titles just like we did with the first methodology. We could take something like The Persistence of Memory and just iterate on that. What's a different way to say that? Maybe eternal memory or enduring memory. That also means basically the same thing and might make a better song title. We also could borrow from book titles. East of Eden is a pretty great title. The Sun Also Rises. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. That one probably should be shortened to Why the Caged Bird Sings, or just The Caged Bird Sings, or The Bird Sings, or The Caged Bird. Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. That could just be shortened to Midnight in the Garden, or The Garden of Good and Evil, or The Garden of Light and Darkness, or The Infinite Game, which is actually kind of a self-help book by Simon Sinek, but quite an interesting title. So hopefully at this point you've created a song title that you think is compelling, something that you think has some vivid imagery, or it's just something that if you saw that song title, you would want to listen to that song, or you'd at least be curious what it was about. Which brings us to what the next step is before you can really go on to write the rest of your song, which is to figure out, okay, I have this cool song title, what is it about? So let's take two song titles that we've already mentioned in this video, that we've already come up with in this process, and then answer this question. Figure out what would this song be about, or at least some different options we have. So let's start with Vile Crown. So first of all, it's important to know, okay, what does vile mean? And basically it means wicked or evil, but actually an antiquated version of the word actually meant worthless. So we can play with all these different meanings when we're trying to figure out, okay, Vile Crown, what would that song be about? So one thing that Vile Crown could be about is maybe when we say Vile Crown, it's this crown that somebody else is wearing that we are looking at and we have some disdain for, because maybe they're wearing this crown, maybe they're the boss at work or something, they think they're better than everybody else, but you see that really they're not a very good person, really they're not any better than anybody else, so you sort of are calling it a crown sarcastically because you're like, really, you don't deserve any crown and you don't really have a crown. You're just letting a little bit of power get to your head. Maybe that's what Vile Crown could be about. You're talking disparagingly about somebody who thinks they're better than you. Or maybe there's nobody wearing the vile crown and instead you are just looking at this crown and you're regarding it as vile because you know that you are drawn to want to wear this vile crown, but you know what it will turn you into. You could almost think of this like a less fantasy version of the Lord of the Rings and the ring, right? The ring is something that corrupts, and that's a symbol for how power can corrupt. So this is sort of your way of being like, okay, power corrupts. I'm drawn to this power. I concede that as a human being, I kind of want this, but I know that ultimately it is going to be a vile thing. Something else this vile crown could represent is maybe you are a prince or a princess and you know you have to inherit the crown. That is your fate, but you resent the crown because it entails a bunch of different things you want. Maybe you want a normal life. You don't want to have to be royalty. You don't want to have to marry a certain person. You want to be able to marry who you love. Whatever reason it might be, maybe it's something where this is a literal thing you're going to get. It represents what your future is, and you resent that future. You don't actually want it. All right, let's take a second example. This time we will take a title we came up with that came from a piece of art. Let's take Midnight in the Garden. So again, a great place to start is to think about, okay, what does midnight represent? Is it the end of something? Does it represent just that quiet time of night, maybe less disturbances? And then, of course, what does the garden represent? When we say the garden, what garden? Is it maybe an allusion to the Garden of Eden specifically, or is it just any old garden? Or is this all very literal, and it literally is about you and another person, or maybe you alone in a garden at midnight? So off of that, maybe this is something very literal. So it's about you and a person meeting together at midnight in a garden. Maybe it's a romantic thing. Or maybe the garden is sort of an allusion to life and great things that are growing and beautiful things. Maybe even sort of an allusion to Eden. You're saying, hey, this is a great place, a beautiful place. And midnight does mean the end. So maybe it's just something that represents the end of a relationship. So midnight in the garden is you and another person symbolically in a garden at midnight, because even though it's beautiful, even though what you had is great, it's coming to an end. Something else that midnight in the garden could represent is who would meet at midnight in a garden? Good question. Really, you were expecting to meet somebody much earlier, but it's midnight, you're still at the garden, still waiting, even though it's long past the time that the person was supposed to show up. This, of course, could be a romantic thing, a specific one, where you thought somebody was going to be there for you and then they weren't. Or it could be something that just means that you're getting older and you're getting tired of being single and you thought you wouldn't be single by now. Or it could be something about maybe struggling with infertility. You thought that a child would come. You thought you would have a kid by now. You thought there would be somebody else in this garden with you by now, but there still isn't. And then, of course, there's the obvious one, which is just that it's about the peaceful serenity that there would be in a garden at midnight, where it's just purely literal and there's nothing more to it. All right, so at this point, you've come up with a song title that resonates with you and figured out what it is about. From there, you probably would come up with music that sort of matches with that vibe and then write the lyrics. But we've covered how to start a song with a song title. And maybe you didn't like any of the examples we came up with today. That's totally fine. That took me, I don't know, 5-10 minutes before making this video. So if you put 20-30 minutes into it, or maybe even a whole hour into just trying to figure out a great song title that resonates with you, you will probably come up with something much better. And hey, that may result in a better song, or at least a song that you're more excited to write. If you're interested in 19 other ways to start writing a song, be sure to check out my free guide, 20 different ways to start writing a song. I think a really powerful way to keep us on our toes with our songwriting, a great way for us to simply grow as songwriters and to write songs that don't all sound the same, is to start writing songs in different ways, because first of all, you never know which ones are going to resonate with you the most, and second of all, it's just a great way to change it up and avoid writer's block and write songs otherwise we wouldn't. Maybe we would never write a song about a vile crown and about resenting this crown that we know we have to wear. Maybe we would never think of something like that if we didn't reverse engineer from a song title. Can be a great way to go, especially if you want to write a song about something that just normally you wouldn't think of. Reverse engineering from a song title can be a great way to go. Again, if you want 20 other different ways or 19 other different ways, be sure to check out my free guide, songwritingtheory.com/free guide, 20 different ways to start writing a song. Be sure to check it out. My free gift to you. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.